Galw'r Cynulliad Cenedlaethol.
I call the National Assembly to order, and the first question on our agenda this afternoon is questions to the First Minister, and the first question is from Di Lloyd.
Thank you, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on plans to increase the number of Welsh speakers in South Wales West?
Well, our vision is to have 1 million Welsh speakers use the language by 2050, and we have consulted on a draft strategy in order to achieve that.
Thank you very much for that response, First Minister, and of course, like the rest of the Chamber, I'm very pleased to support your ambitious objective of securing 1 million Welsh speakers by halfway through the century, and that's an increase of somewhere in the region of 400,000 Welsh speakers across Wales, or an average increase of 18,000 for each of our current counties. Now, of course, the education sector and its WESPs are crucially important to this, and in light of that, do you believe that enhancing the capacity of Welsh Medium Primary School by some 20 places over the next 3 years, as is suggested in the Bridgend WESP and other councils in South Wales West, is that small number sufficient in order to reach your target? And if not, then what will you do to ensure that local councils understand the crucially important role that they will play in supporting you in achieving your target?
Well, local authorities, of course, will be responsible for publishing their strategic plans on supporting the Welsh language in the schools, and they have to present those to us in order for us to approve them. If there is any scheme which is not adequate, then the government will not approve it.
Would the First Minister acknowledge the importance of the Urdd Eisteddfod for the Welsh language, and would he therefore congratulate those people who organise these and fundraise and are fundraising for the Bridgend Urdd Eisteddfod on the Pen Coed land? Now, the hard work of a number of volunteers that help to maintain the language is greater among our young people and in some of the communities where the Welsh language perhaps isn't the first language. And of course, I'm sure you will be warmly welcome in Neuadd Gwyrddi in Cefn Cribwr this Friday to enjoy the Twmpath Dawns or the Ceili and to fundraise too.
Well, thank you very much. I always receive a warm welcome at Cefn Cribwr, because at one time, of course, the village was in my constituency before it was moved into yours. As one who has worked hard to raise funds for the Urdd Eisteddfod, I've organised with my 2 quiz nights with my wife. I'm very supportive personally, and of course I support everyone who supports the Urdd in the area in order to ensure that the Eisteddfod is a great success this year, and of course to ensure that there is more growth in the numbers and of people speaking and using Welsh language in the county.
Thank you very much. At a recent meeting with Swansea Council, officials suggested that their focus during this cycle of the WESPs would be on promoting the Welsh language, and that's a step forward, but it doesn't respond to demand. And I got the impression from the Cabinet member that she thought that the current vocalised demand for provision came from a specific section of the Swansea society, and I believe that there should be at least one person with good Welsh language skills in each Flying Start schemes. Now, do you agree that early access to both of our language will enhance opportunities for children from more deprived backgrounds?
Well, yes, of course, and we must ensure that there are more places available in the nursery schools, but also we must ensure that children in the nursery schools are still remaining in the Welsh stream when they go into the primary schools and the secondary schools, in order to ensure that they don't lose the language skills that they've gained as they go through the school.
Minister, the Welsh Language Commissioner said that in order to increase the number of Welsh speakers, we need radical change to our education system. She has suggested we should consider teaching all primary schools through the medium of Welsh. It has been compulsory for every school child in Wales to learn Welsh since 1999, yet despite this, the numbers of Welsh speakers has fallen. Dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg. Polls suggest that the majority of people are opposed to compulsory teaching. Is it time that we accepted that maybe the stick approach is not working, and rather than dictating everyone should learn Welsh, can we maybe instead be making it easier for those who really want to learn? Diolch.
I'm not sure the member was trying to say. She did give me the impression she was suggesting that every primary school should be Welsh medium. I think there are issues surrounding that, particularly practical issues in terms of recruiting teachers. But no, I firmly believe that it's right that our national languages should be compulsory until the age of 16. There are issues about the way in which Welsh has been taught in English medium schools, particularly through the short course. I don't think we can say hand on heart that we have created confident Welsh speakers in our English medium schools. Clearly that's not the case, which is why the new curriculum will be important, and which is why moving away from the idea that Welsh is solely an academic area of study, moving more towards it being seen as a vocational skill. For those, of course, who want to study it academically, that's important, of course, but seeing it as a vocational skill that is acquired through school, that's going to be important in the future. I think that would be a good way of improving the way in which Welsh is taught and learned in the English medium schools.
Thank you.
Tynwyd cwestiwn 2 yn ôl.
Question 2 was withdrawn. Question 3, Julie Morgan.
What discussions has the First Minister had with the Prime Minister about future regional policy?
Well, I have raised the issue of replacement funding, which is needed to finance regional policy. I raised that in my very first meeting with the Prime Minister last June, and we have been very clear about our priorities, including regional policy at each JMC since.
I thank the First Minister for that response. When he next meets Prime Minister Theresa May in the context of the Brexit negotiations, will he be certain to stress how vitally important regional economic strategy is to Wales? Would he emphasise that replacement funding from the UK government must be at least equal in size to lost EU funding, and finally that it must be under the Welsh Government's control?
Well, a promise was made by some in the campaign last year that Wales would not lose out a penny if Wales lost the European Union. I expect that promise to be honoured. If not, then the people of Wales have every right to ask why they were, if it is the case that this is true, misled. Secondly, of course, it's hugely important that the economic policies that we've developed here, the lowest unemployment for many, many years, lower than England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, the best foreign direct investment figures for 30 years, are fully within the control of the Welsh Government to deliver those benefits to the people of Wales.
Nick Ramsey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, this morning I attended the annual FUW Farmers Breakfast in the Pierhead building, hosted by Paul Davis, an excellent event as ever. Farmers are understandably eager for clarity on the system of farm payments to be created in the wake of the UK leaving the EU when that eventually happens. Can you update us on your government's discussions with the UK government on the best way to safeguard future support for the Welsh farming industry?
Roberts, the FEW President, last week when he expressed his concern about a perfect storm, and he is right to do so. At the moment, we have no clarity beyond 2020. There are some within DEFRA who suggest there should be no farming subsidies at all. That is not something that we would support as a government. And there are some who suggest that the European market is not important for farming. 90% of our food and drink exports go to the European market. It cannot be replaced easily as a market for our goods. And so we must ensure that as the UK leaves the EU, that nothing interferes with the ability of our farmers to sell on the same terms as they do now to by far their biggest market.
Adam Price.
Pre-1979, the UK regional policy had 3 elements: grants through the Regional Employment Premier, but also fiscal incentives through the selective employment tax and cheap loans. In his discussions with the UK government in the new ministerial forum that was announced earlier this week, will he ask that all of those levers will be available for us to ensure that Wales can develop its competitive advantage?
I think we are in very new territory in terms of what will be needed in the future to attract investment into Wales. For example, there are issues such as tax incentives, which I think need to be further developed. Should there be the ability, for example, to look at tax incentives for research and development, see them devolved. APD, a great driver, not just for Cardiff Airport, but for Valley and other airports in Wales as well, refused for no good reason other than the fact that they say it was a mistake to devolving it to Scotland, so therefore it doesn't come to us. But I think it is important that as we look at the next few years, that there is an innovative way of looking at the way tax incentives are used across the UK, rather than taking the view that one size fits all.
Lee Waters.
Diolch. First Minister, would you welcome the fact the Prime Minister has announced an industrial strategy? It's better late than never. I'm encouraged that one of the sectors the UK government intends to prioritise includes robotics and automation. The Bank of England has estimated that there are 15 million jobs across the UK at risk from automation, 700,000 jobs in Wales. And would he work with employers in Wales to make sure that they future-proof their workforce to meet this huge challenge for us?
Well, I think there are two issues about the industrial strategy. I mean, there's little in it that could be disagreed with, but of course it's a bit of a mishmash because some of the pillars are actually devolved. They're not the responsibility of the UK government. Some of them are, some of them are mixed, so there needs to be greater clarity there. Yes, I think there will be a temptation to automate further, which is why we need to focus very, very strongly on raising productivity of workers across the UK to make sure that employers are not tempted to replace human beings with machines because of a productivity issue. And that is something certainly that we want to focus on very, very strongly, raising productivity levels, for example, to at least the level of Germany, to make sure that our working people in Britain are not disadvantaged because of those productivity levels.
Questions now from the party for party leaders. Leader of the UKIP Group, Neil Hamilton.
First Minister will be relieved to know I'm not going to ask him about the EU today, as I no wish to appear typecast. And anyway, I had the opportunity to do so yesterday and will do later on today. I'd like to ask about the health service, in particular in relation to GPs. He'll know that GP numbers are broadly static, yet there's a rising demand for their services. And in fact, in 2014, the latest figures for which I've been able to find, we have the lowest number of GPs in Wales per 1,000 people in the UK. 17% of GPs have sought guidance or advice for work-related stress in the last 2 years. 84% worry they may miss something serious in a patient due to workload pressures. And 56% plan to leave general practice or reduce hours in the next 5 years. Does he accept there's a growing crisis in morale amongst GPs in Wales?
GPs and indeed other health professionals who work in primary care at a level that we think is right and appropriate. For example, if you look at social care, we fund social care at 6% per head higher than England does, which is why we've not had the humanitarian crisis, to use the words of the Red Cross, that England has had within its NHS. We are also committed to recruiting additional GPs. We have more GPs in Wales than ever before, and that's why, of course, we have the recruitment campaign that was launched last year. I'm relieved he's not asking me about Europe, because he did appear at the press conference that was held yesterday with myself and the leader of Plaid Cymru as a member of the audience. I do thank him for the fact he is such a fan he cannot bear even to be away from the two of us even for a day.
Sometimes you can have too much of a good thing, but in the case of the First Minister, I'm happy to say that isn't so. Yeah, it's no answer to the question I posed. It's no answer to the question I posed a moment ago, that things are worse in England than they are in Wales. It is true that there is a pincer movement here of increasing demand on GPs, and with GP numbers not keeping pace with those rising demands. NHS funding on GPs in Wales as part of the Welsh Government's budget is down since 2004 from 10% of the total to 7.5%. The Royal College of General Practitioners say that more GP spending could actually save the NHS £90 million a year by 2020 if we reprioritise GPs within the Welsh Government's NHS budget. So is that something which the First Minister is prepared to consider?
Well, our £43 million primary care fund is supporting that with the emphasis on new and improved ways of delivering services. That involves delivering services and developing the services of nurses and pharmacists, physiotherapists and social workers to work alongside GPs. The answer lies not simply in increasing the number of GPs, it lies in ensuring that there are sufficient professionals available in a particular setting. We see it, for example, in Prestatyn, so that people can be referred to the appropriate professional rather than piling all the pressure onto GPs when people could go somewhere else.
Professionals will also know that in some areas of Wales, patient pressure in terms of numbers on doctors' surgery sessions is now excessive. Can he give us any idea of what he thinks is the maximum number of patients that a GP can reasonably deal with in a working day? And in particular, in relation to home visits for patients that are housebound, the Royal College of GPs tell me that in certain instances, people are having to wait up to 20 hours for a visit, which is clearly unacceptable. Some doctors are dealing with 120 patients per session instead of 50 or 60. Exactly how many does he think is reasonable for doctors to see in a session? And how does he expect the Welsh Government to meet its 6-hour target, which is currently being breached left, right and centre throughout the country?
It depends on the patients who come through the surgery on that particular day. For some people, they can be seen in 5 minutes. For other people, it takes longer. It depends on the nature of the patient. And GPs will have a good idea of the communities that they work in and the patients that they're seeing during the course of that day. But the point is, the last thing we want to do is to funnel more and more people towards GPs. We say to people, choose well. Go and see a pharmacist first. If not, then go and see a community nurse or a GP practice nurse. Then, and only then, is the GP somebody to go and see. There are issues of consistency of GP services across Wales. That much is true. Some offer broader services than others. They offer longer hours than others. And that's why it's so important to work with the Royal College and others to make sure that we see greater consistency in terms of service delivery in the future.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru.
Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I'm not going to ask you about Article 50 or the white paper that we jointly launched yesterday, because there are statements on both those matters coming later. Instead, I'd like to ask you about matters relating to public services for which you are responsible. Do you accept that many rail commuters on the Valley Lines in particular are facing a touch-and-go situation when it comes to getting to work on time?
Well, she says services that we are responsible for. We're not responsible for the rail services. We will be from next year. We welcome that. We want to make sure that the Wales and Borders franchise properly serves people with decent quality rolling stock. They don't have that at the moment. More frequent trains and reasonable fares to pay. And those, amongst other things, will be our guiding principles as we look to let the franchise from next year onwards.
So it's nothing to do with the government then? First Minister, it is a touch-and-go situation for many workers, and I know that because I face regular delays, as does everyone else who uses the service. We never know when there are going to be delays or cancellations, and in fact there was a delay to my train coming to work this morning. It's a daily occurrence. Now, people are feeling as though they're not getting value for money, but more importantly, that those trains can't be relied upon. Now, for years, Arriva has tried to make the service work by pushing the current trains to the max, and those trains, as you will know, are very, very old. It looks to those of us who use the service that service is at breaking point. If it does break, First Minister, you will have to do something. Is it acceptable to you that the overcrowding situation in the south of Wales is the fastest growing in the UK outside of London?
Oh, I'm glad that the growth is increasing, but I mean, the Leader of Plaid Cymru doesn't mention the metro. The whole point of the metro is to make sure that we have more frequent services, better rolling stock. We don't have 40-year-old stock refurbished running on the Valley Lines, no air conditioning. We don't have a situation where the track operators and the stock operators blame each other for delays. So yes, when we get control of this from next year onwards, we do want to see a metro system, one that is extended in the future and one that offers a far better service than has been available so far. And she would have seen the comments, of course, from the Economy Secretary in terms of his views on the profits that Arriva have made, and despite the services below par, which he rightly points out, that have been on offer so far.
First Minister, we can't afford to wait for the metro. That could be years before we see the metro coming on stream. Now, my predecessor as Plaid Cymru leader, Ieuan Wyn-Jones, was a strong critic of the current rail franchise contract for Wales. He said that the way that it had been drawn up, yes, by an agency of the UK government, had led to a decade of overcrowding, and that verdict still stands today. Last Friday, the Welsh Affairs Select Committee said that new trains would be needed, and they described the 2003 contract as a huge mistake. Now, commuters are not prepared to put up with another poorly negotiated franchise. Your government will be responsible for the next franchise, and we already know that the planning for that is underway. But to date, you've yet to make clear to this Assembly what rolling stock will be provided, and I'm talking quantity here as well as quality. We've not been told if there are going to be new trains or carriages, if they've been ordered yet, if they're going to be new trains, if they're going to be second-hand or even third-hand. Will you tell us today what trains are going to be available for the next franchise? And will you give a cast-iron guarantee that the mistakes of the past contract won't be repeated?
We have no intention of repeating the mistakes made by the UK government with regard to the last contract. She rightly refers to what the former member for Ynys-Môn, Iwan Jones, said. He was in charge of transport for 4 years. There's little he could do because of the fact that it wasn't evolved, and his frustration was shared by me. Better trains, more frequent trains, more modern rolling stock. One of the problems we have now is that actually it's almost impossible to procure diesel trains. They're seen as ancient technology. And so we have to make sure that we see electrification. We have to see the commitment, for example, from the UK government that they will electrify from Cardiff to Swansea to keep the promise that they made and which they are now reneging on, to see the electrification of the North Wales main line as well. That's hugely important. But in terms of what the trains will look like in the future, at the very least, they'll be hybrids, diesel electric. But we have to make sure that electrification is taken through. Well, they don't get ordered. I mean, the franchise is part of the negotiation. The whole point is you have the negotiation on the franchise, and as part of the franchise negotiation, you specify what stock the operator has to actually use. That's part of the franchise negotiations. She asks a question, a fair question: will the service be better? The answer I give is yes. I've said that. I'm sure she'll hold me to account on that over the next few years.
Arweinydd y Ceidwadwyr.
Leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew Arty-Davies.
Officer, when you come third in the leaders' rankings to ask questions, you normally assume the topic of the day will be asked by one of the other two. So I also give the health warning that I'll leave my European questions till later on in the afternoon. But I would like to ask you, First Minister, specifically on the Estin inspection report that has been brought forward today. You not unreasonably, when you first became First Minister in 2009, said that you were going to make education your priority. Just before Christmas, we had the PISA results that show no progress at all in Wales's rankings when it comes to international stats. Today, the Estin inspection reports shows a damning indictment of failure of leadership and in particular excellence in teaching, especially in the secondary sector, where if you choose a secondary school in Wales, you've got less than a 50% chance of going to a school that's got excellence or good teaching practice. Do you think that's acceptable after nearly 7 years of being First Minister?
Well, there are two things here to bear in mind. Firstly, teachers' paying conditions have not been devolved yet. They will be next year. That gives us the opportunity to put in place a proper training package with pay, with conditions that will attract good teachers to Wales and improve the training of teachers in Wales. We needed that package. Scotland have done it. There's no reason why we should not be able to do it. Secondly, the report makes the point, which is correct, because we saw it in PISA actually, that not enough is done to stretch those at the top end of the academic league. That's exactly what PISA showed. The reason why the PISA figures were disappointing is pretty much because we don't do well at the top end. Other countries do better at the top end. If you look at the middle bands, actually, we're very comparable with the top end. So that report has actually said to teachers, look, we need to do more to make sure that those who are the higher achievers academically are pushed more to do even better. And I'm glad that the report has actually shown that, to make sure that teachers and politicians understand that's what needs to be done.
I heard in your answer, First Minister, you talked about paying conditions in Scotland. Actually, Scotland's results on the PISA rankings collapsed, and that is no example to follow, I'd suggest to you, First Minister. You've had initiative after initiative since your tenure as First Minister, and indeed since Labour have been running education since 1999. We've had teacher workload initiatives, we've had the consortia, the regional consortia that have come in for special criticism today from Estin, showing that there's poor performance there with collaborative working. The Secretary of the NUT has said that there are significant barriers to improving teachers' performance in schools and access to best practices. Do you recognise these significant barriers, First Minister? And in particular, I go back to the point again. We've had initiative after initiative under your leadership, and yet we're still getting Estin reports 7 years into your tenure as First Minister, and you set education as a priority. You're failing, First Minister.
You know, to be lectured by somebody who stood for election on the basis of cutting education spending by 12%, is unbelievable. To be lectured by somebody whose party is failing to build schools in England. Failing to build schools in England while we are building schools in Wales. To be lectured by somebody who wanted to bring back grammar schools? Grammar schools? So chucking most children onto a scrap heap? No, no, no. I'm not going to be lectured by him. Of course there are issues in the education system. We see improvement, and we're seeing it. Why? GCSE results are improving. A-level results are improving. We're seeing more schools who are coming out of a category of being underperforming. We're seeing the support that teachers need. Eston have pointed out the good practice as well. It's not all bad, it's not a damning indictment, all of nonsense. It's shown that there are particular weaknesses that need to be focused on. They are being focused on, but we know that our schools are going in the right direction with proper funding, not being starved of funding by his party elsewhere in Britain.
Well, you can always know when you strike a nerve with the First Minister. He brings up statistics that don't stand up to any scrutiny at all. We're talking about the here and now and the Eston report that was delivered today, which is a damning indictment on your stewardship here in Wales. If you take one local education authority, nearly Cardiff, 50% of head teachers have left their post in the last 3 years. 50%, nearly 50% have left. Initiative after initiative, as I highlighted, you've brought forward, and you are failing to drive up standards here in Wales. Kids get one chance to go to school, First Minister. You set education as the priority. You have failed to deliver. It's about time you accepted some accountability for this, and instead of rehearsing the arguments of yesterday, start mapping out a vision for tomorrow and the success that we all want to see in our education system here in Wales.
There is, I believe, a vacancy as Donald Trump's press secretary for the leader of the Welsh Conservatives by his presentation of alternative facts. It is a fact indisputable that GCSE results have improved over the last 3 years. It is a fact indisputable that A-level results are improving. It is a fact indisputable that his party wanted to cut education spending by 12%. They boasted about it. They produced a mini-manifesto which included that figure in the mini-manifesto. Or is that an alternative fact? The reality is that if his party had come anywhere near education in Wales, they would have destroyed the education system through cuts. They wouldn't have built schools that have kept children being taught in schools that were falling apart. We have never done that. Education is moving in the right direction with improvements across the board, and that's exactly where we will take education in the future. Not backwards to the days when education was underfunded by the Conservative Party in London, a party that truly does not care about education for all and does not care about the opportunities that are available for youngsters in Wales. That's what we stand for. They will never understand what it means to get a good education and good opportunity because they've never had to fight for it themselves.
Cwestiwn 4.
Question 4, Mark Isherwood.
Will the First Minister outline the Welsh Government's plan for winter preparedness in the Welsh NHS?
Yes, we continue to support health and social care organisations through our quarterly national seasonal planning meetings to inform the development of their seasonal plans, which include preparedness for the winter period.
Thank you. Well, in 2015, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, NICE, published its public health guidance on tackling excess winter deaths, mobility and the health risks associated with cold homes, outlining a number of recommendations on how health and social care practitioners could reduce the risk of death and ill health associated with fuel poverty and therefore the pressures on the Welsh NHS. Given that Age Cymru have said last September that fuel poverty is a significant cause of excess winter deaths, how will your Welsh Government respond to the call from the Fuel Poverty Coalition Cymru for these NICE guidelines to be implemented by your government in Wales?
Well, we'll look at Nest and look at Arbed. They are schemes that have helped so many people, particularly older people, to actually get homes that are warmer, to ensure that they can afford to heat their homes, to have fuel heating systems and boiler systems that are more efficient than they once had, and thus keep them out of hospital because they are in homes that are underheated. So we believe we have a good record on that in terms of the money we've allocated over the years to help so many people across Wales to live in warmth and to be able to afford their heating bills. And that's something we're proud of.
Rhina Piorwerth.
Diolch, Llywydd. Does the First Minister agree that what the latest figures on accident and emergency waiting times published last week, especially those waiting more than 12 hours, what they show is that It's a year-round capacity issue that we face with, on average, around 3,000 patients waiting longer than 12 hours, month after month after month after month. Isn't that evidence of a systemic problem with the delivery of emergency care in Wales, with excellent staff being asked to deliver the impossible rather than something that can be blamed on poor weather?
What happens in the winter is that even though numbers in A&E actually drop, the people coming in, their conditions tend to be longer-term respiratory conditions, they're older. In the summer, actually, A&E admissions tend to be higher, but they tend to be injuries, for example, that don't need as much time in A&E. The issues that we face are these. We need to make sure, as we have done, that social care spending is kept high, and it is higher than it is in England. They're reaping an unfortunate whirlwind in England on that at the moment. It is true to say the demand is high, and I do pay tribute to those who work in the service for the services that they provide. But every consultant in A&E will tell you, and indeed it was said again today, that there are too many people going to A&E who don't need to be there. And so what we say to people is, go to see the pharmacist, go to see a GP nurse, out-of-hours GP cover. All these are alternatives. Don't just default to A&E simply because A&E can't turn you away. And people are triaged when they get to A&E. If people are not urgent cases, then they do wait longer. That is the reality of it. The urgent cases get treated first. So yes, people need to make their own choices, their own proper choices, and we will continue to make sure that we fund our hospitals and A&E departments to meet a demand that's been increasing at a rate of 7% a year.
Question 5, Simon.
Question 5, Simon Thomas. What steps is the Welsh Government taking regarding Aberthaw Power Station following decision of the European Court of Justice last September?
Natural Resources Wales is the environmental regulator responsible for modifying Aberthaw's environmental permit so that it gives effect to the court's judgment. We as a government, of course, continue to closely monitor the progress of both NRW and RWE towards delivering compliance.
Well, the court case was last September. RWE and the member state, which is the UK government, was found guilty of allowing illegal levels of pollution from Aberthaw Power Station. Since then, there's only been one letter written by NRW to the company, and that hasn't been responded to. There's been no change to the permit for this pollution, and Public Health Wales confirmed to me last week that 1,150 early deaths took place annually in Wales because of nitrogen dioxide pollution, which is the pollution emerging from Aberthaw Power Station. Why are we allowing such a situation where there is this coming from a power station happening months after a court decided that this needed to be tackled?
Well, this is a matter for NRW, but what I will say is that the emission of nitro oxide, those emissions have been reduced to a level from Aberthaw itself to a level which isn't far from the acceptable level, which is close to what the court said. And although it is a matter for Natural Resources Wales, it does look as if the emissions have been reduced, and now it's a matter of seeing whether it's possible to permit the place to proceed.
Well, I was very interested, First Minister, by that answer, because I've not seen the data, and I thought that some level of investment would be required to reduce these emissions, which were over twice the actual agreed European limit. So I'm sure if you could put that information in the library or circulate it to members, we would be very, very grateful. But the thing is, you do have to act quickly so that the public can be assured they will be protected. This power station will survive through to the medium term, albeit for peak demand. But, you know, its emissions go over Cardiff, Bristol, parts of the West Country. You know, this is a serious matter.
Yes, the information, as I say, that we have from NRW is that emissions have reduced from the plant itself. On the 6th of January, NRW wrote to RWE setting out their intention to begin the process of modifying Aberthaw's permit. That letter was accompanied by a formal request for an explanation of RWE's compliance plans, and the deadline for responding to the information request is the 17th of February. I think it's fair to say that RWE have invested in the plan to reduce emissions, but of course they must be brought within the limit in order for them to be able to achieve to get a permit from NRW in the future.
Cwestiwn 6, Rhys ap
Question 6, Rhys ap Iorwerth. Will the First Minister make a statement on the National Grid's plans in Ynys Môn?
We have consistently pressed the National Grid to ensure its proposals for the new line across Anglesey are fit for purpose and sensitive to the environment through which it will pass.
Last Wednesday, the National Assembly for Wales made a very clear statement that it's our democratically expressed wish in this place for the National Grid to seek alternative methods of making new electricity connections in Wales rather than putting in place new pylons for any new developments here. That's particularly pertinent to us in Ynys Môn, of course, where we face seeing a new line of pylons being erected over the next few years. Now, in light of the fact that this Assembly has demonstrated its democratic will a week ago, will the First Minister give a commitment to contact the National Grid again to put pressure on it and Ofgem to convince them that they should listen to the democratic voice of our National Assembly and reconsider their proposals? After all, every voice representing Ynys Môn, apart from one UKIP regional member, and I include here myself as the Assembly member, the MP, parish councils, town councils and the county council have all expressed our opposition. The National Assembly has supported that, and we would want the support of the First Minister to urge Ofgem and the Grid to listen.
Well, of course, the Assembly's position is very close to the government's standpoint, and we wish to see the cables being undergrounded. That's our whole standpoint on this. I'm very happy again to tell the National Grid that that is the view of the Parliament of Wales, and therefore is a view that they should take into detailed consideration.
Mark Isherwood.
Yeah, well, when I discussed this with National Grid a while back, they told me they get paid for what they do, whether pylons go overground or underground, but Ofgem require best value for the customer, and this will ultimately be paid through customer energy bills. Given that best value means quality value as well as price, what dialogue will your government have with Ofgem, given the concern raised by the town and community councils across Anglesey that the pylon option has been chosen, quote, on the basis of cost alone?
Well, bear in mind, of course, that the rules are put in place by the UK government, not by us. But he asks, would we reinforce our previous position? We will continue to do that. Our preferred position on new grid infrastructure is one of undergrounding, because we know the environmental sensitivities across much of Wales with regard to that. And it's right to say that price is not the sole determinant of whether a contract is awarded or not, or whether work is carried out or not. And I share his view that it's hugely important to look at a wide range of factors when we look at the overall cost, both environmental, economic and social, when it comes to laying out new grid infrastructure. It's why we take the view that the preferred position, the default position should be undergrounding.
Cwestiwn 7, Rhiannon.
Question 7, Rhiannon Pass.
Diolch, Fawad. First Minister, what discussions have the Welsh Government had with the UK Government to improve current rail services in South East Wales?
We are in regular dialogue with the UK Government on these matters due to the current arrangements for managing the Wales and Borders franchise. And of course, we are leading the procurement of the next franchise, which will improve services.
Thank you. Tonight on BBC Wales Week In, Week Out, Nick Savini goes behind the scenes of Arriva Trains Wales as it investigates the worst overcrowding on commuter trains for years. My constituency in Islwyn continually raises me overcrowding on Arriva Trains Wales, but the focus of Arriva Trains Wales has made a profit of 133.88 million in dividends for its parent company since taking over the UK franchise to run the Wales and Border train services. It also had 70 million in the bank at the time it filed its last accounts. And as stated to the Leader of Plaid Cymru, the existing franchise does come to an end in October 2018, an agonising 20 months away. My constituents are fearful that during the forthcoming Six Nations, they will again be stuck on railway stations in Newbridge, Crosskeys, Risca and Pontymister, as the Ebervale to Cardiff service is already at capacity. And as electrification is so deeply delayed from the UK Government, can I ask that the First Minister calls on the UK Government to do its job and act, and for the UK Government to call on Arriva Trains Wales to find an interim solution before the new franchise is awarded, and can he outline what investigations have taken place into the capacity for Arriva to hire contemporary railway carriages that could be pulled by older diesel engines?
Well, the difficulty we have is that we work with Arriva, that's true, excuse me, but in terms of having levers, well, no, they won't arrive till next year. Why this wasn't involved before is a good question, but at least from next year we'll have this, this opportunity. I know in the past that Arriva has obtained locomotives to pull locomotive haul trains. They did in the Rumney Valley for a number of years, and those trains are popular, actually, with commuters. There is no reason to my mind why they couldn't seek to do that again. But, I mean, what my colleague, Member for Islington, has neatly outlined is the frankly balmy situation where we pay a subsidy to rail operators to provide a substandard service while they make an enormous profit. And this apparently was the wonder of privatisation back in the early 90s. My view is that we should be in the same position as the Scots, where we are able to look at having a public sector, not-for-profit agency running the railway lines for the benefit of the people of Wales, and not by paying a subsidy in order to pay shareholders.
Mohammed Ashkar.
Officer, the House of Common Welfare Committee has said recently that there is an urgent need for new trains on Wales rail network. It went on to say passengers were tired of old and cramped trains, with some rolling stock in use being over 40 years old. Some locomotives are still running after sell-by date. With the Wales and Border franchise coming up to renewal, First Minister, what discussion has the Welsh Government had with regard to providing modern trains to improve rail services for passengers in South East Wales, which is being promised for a very long time now?
Well, these are all part of the franchise negotiations. We've already, of course, very publicly produced our plan for a metro, which will see an improvement in journey times and indeed in facilities and rolling stock as far as passengers are concerned. For the first time, it will be the people of Wales who are able to determine what their train services, not intercity, but what their train services actually look like. We had this bizarre situation at one point where it was said that the Wales and Borders franchise would only cover trains that began their journeys and terminated their journeys in Wales, which would mean effectively the Conwy Valley line and nothing else north of Merthyr. I'm glad that other odd situation seems to have been vacated by the UK government, but we are determined to provide a far better level of service, not just in fact for our own people, but for those people who live on the other side of the border, but who use trains from the Wales and Borders franchise.
Stefan Lewis.
I declare an interest that my sister works for Network Rail. First Minister, I've had correspondence from people who are frustrated at insufficient public transport links in Blaenau Gwent at night time. Currently, the last Cardiff train stops at Llanhilleth with no public transport links to get further up the valley, leaving taxis as the only option, if any of those are available. So can you update us on plans to open a new station at Abertillery? But importantly, what steps and what intervention will the Welsh Government have and partnership working with the local authority to provide adequate bus links before a new metro comes on stream?
I do fear the member has made himself the font, or the recipient, rather, of all rail-related complaints in the Assembly as a result of his declaration. But he makes an important point. Abertillery, of course, is included in the metro plans as an area of expansion. The railway tracks haven't been, well, they were last used when the Rose Hayworth mine was still in place some 30 years ago now, nearly, but it is a community that needs to be linked in. Where there are no existing heavy rail lines, then light rail clearly is a preference. It's more easily extendable, and we want to make sure that communities that lost their rail links some years ago do regain them as part of the metro plans.
Question 8, Neil McAvoy.
Question 8, Neil McAvoy.
The Welsh Government budget is allocated to the prevention of fraud.
Well, given the integrated nature of the internal control measures designed into systems and processes, for the purpose of identifying potential fraud, it's not possible to measure what the percentage of spend actually is, but there is, of course, a counter-fraud unit in the Welsh Government headed up by a retired police officer.
Diolch. Do you not think it's ironic that your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was talking about a rigged system this month? Because in Wales, it's Labour that's rigged the system. You shipped in David Goldstone, the Labour donor, to stay in the Hilton as an advisor. You splurged millions on can coats. It had a weak business case, but just happened to be next to the former minister's constituency. Cook.com got a massive grant and is now being investigated by Revenues and Customs for tax irregularities. Again, the company providing the guarantee to them gave a donation to the Labour Party. Cardiff Aviation doesn't pay any rent, and yet people, your party, are throwing people out of their homes if they can't pay bedroom tax. Are you happy with all this? Are you happy, First Minister, with all this?
Well, I mean, the member's probably wise in not repeating those allegations outside the chamber, I suspect. He has an unhappy history of libel trials, as we know. And from our perspective, I mean, it was just stream of consciousness, as far as I can tell. In terms of appointments, they are done openly. He has criticised, for example, the appointment of the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman was appointed with a Plaid Cymru member on the board who appointed the Ombudsman. The appointment was made by the Assembly, not by government in many, many cases. We have had instances where we've investigated fraud. That is inevitable, I suppose, whenever you get a large organisation in being. And as those investigations are taken forward, regardless of who is the subject of those investigations. If he's suggesting that somehow that Welsh Government advisers have been involved in fraud, which is the tone of his investigation, then he needs to make his allegations known to the appropriate authorities or provide evidence to back that up. This is not the US, this is not the current US government that we're talking about here. This is Wales.
Janet Finch-Saunders.
Joff Llywyd. First Minister, in the allocation of Welsh Government funding grants to our businesses and our organisations, one hopes that there are sufficient checks and monitoring process in the use of our taxpayers' money. Now, questions have arisen recently over Cooked, Cancoat, the Awema scandal, and I'm aware of £900,000 in North Wales where two directors of a bus company faced criminal action, actually. And I'm also aware of 10 to 12 cases under investigation now in how the money has been used as funding that they've had from this government. How can I reassure my constituents in Aberconway that in all matters, that you do take these matters very seriously, and that in all financial transactions between you and any organisations or businesses, that they can feel confident that you will always maintain strict financial probity at the heart of Welsh Government funding and the use of our taxpayers' money?
That's a perfectly fair question, and the answer I gave is this. As I said, we have a counter-fraud unit headed by a retired police officer with experience of leading economic crime and proceeds of crime recovery units. He's also a member of the organising committee for the Wales Fraud Forum. It's also supported by administration staff. The unit is not a big unit, but it does play a leadership role and draws on considerable support from audit, assurance and finance professionals. Is it possible to prevent all crime? No, clearly. But what is important is that that crime is detected, investigated and prosecuted. And the fact that there have been instances of investigation is a sign, I hope, that the member can see that we do take all allegations of fraud seriously, and they are investigated and indeed prosecuted where that's appropriate.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf.